Okay, so actually, this position I'm in is very appropriate because the subject is about the Titanic. Now, I've been interested in this basically my whole life. I was born in Belfast where the ship was built, and I have a few personal connections to the story of the Titanic, which I'll just briefly mention. The designer of the Titanic, Thomas Andrews, actually lived in the house my grandparents ran as a bed and breakfast. I think it's still in operation at Ashrowan in South Belfast. And Thomas Andrews actually lived in that house for a period. So we always joke within the family that one day we might find the original plans for the Titanic in the attic. It might not even be a joke, given that some of the things that have been revealed by historians over the years. Um, Also, I was born on the 1st of September 1985. That's the very day that Robert Ballard rediscovered the ship at the bottom of the Atlantic. So I have those two sort of personal connections in a sense that partly explain why I've long been interested in it, even before the big 1997 film came out. Anyway, in recent days there's been new speculation on what may have actually sank the ship. And this new speculation is intriguing because it points not to the iceberg, but to a fire. Um, and this has kind of been publicized in the last few days, I guess, over work that's been done in the last few years. I've just watched a documentary related to the subject, and it is definitely eye-opening. It's definitely gives you pause for thought. It had long been believed that the Titanic sank as a combination of going too fast and from hitting an iceberg, and I still believe that those were probably a big factor in that. But there is an intriguing thing that has been discovered, and there is going to be a few spoilers here. So if you don't want to know a lot of the details and you want to just go straight and watch the documentary, then stop watching this video now because I'm going to be talking about some of these issues. But basically, a number of archive photographs were discovered in Belfast, and in those photos, local historian, discovered that there was an anomaly in one of these pictures, and it showed this dark mark on the hull. And at first, he put it down to water reflection or lighting. But then there was a picture of the ship from a completely different angle, and it's the same mark there, about 30 feet long. It's a big, sort of rectangular shaped mark at the hull of the ship, on the hull of the ship. And this is quite strange. So, further research revealed that firemen who had worked on the Titanic and had survived the disaster had said there was actually a fire on board, a fire in one of the engines. Now, this wasn't entirely suppressed. It was known at the time that there was a fire, at least among the officials, but that had kind of been dismissed. And what is striking is that during the official inquiry at the Scottish Drill Hall in London, Lord Mersey, who was in charge of the inquiry, dismissed the fire theory completely. Now, what this documentary shows that rather than being a small insignificant fire, this had actually built up over a series of weeks. And that nature of fire has a tendency to do that. In other words, the coal kind of builds up over time. So this wasn't a big raging blaze. This was a gradual build up that weakened the steel. When I first heard this theory, that was the one thing that caught me. I thought, well, okay, if there was a fire, how come no one noticed it? I mean, would it really be possible to suppress a fire on board a ship, even a big ship, for weeks on end? But it appears that there was a number of things going on. It's long been known that there was profit matters involved in the affairs of the Titanic. But to what extent that played a factor, I think, was always a bit ambiguous. What this documentary shows is that Bruce Ismay, who was the chairman of White Star Line, was under enormous pressure to compete with Cunard, which was the big rival company that also produced luxury liners. Well, what was happening is also related to the economic environment of the time. Apparently, and I didn't really know this, but apparently there was a nationwide coal strike in 1912. Uh, mm, Perhaps that's something that needs to be looked at more as to what impact the level of coal production had in terms of the Titanic's profits and in terms of the pressure that those in charge would have felt. Now, the shocking thing is that Ismay and others decided that whilst the fire probably did pose some risk, it would have been a greater risk to be embarrassed, i.e., had the ship, it wasn't even about the ship arriving in New York on time. That was always the way that Ismay was portrayed in films, like, oh, let's get to New York on time. Now, apparently, they knew that the Titanic wouldn't make a speed record. I assume smaller ships had that record for transatlantic speed. So that wasn't actually the issue. And both the 1958 film version, The Night to Remember, and the 1997 James Cameron version show Ismay as pushing Smith to go faster simply to break a record. I think there was more to it than that. Based on this documentary, I think Ismay was under enormous pressure. And it could have been an issue that if you look at where the ship sank, it was a lot closer to its final destination than than its leaving port, i.e., Cope in the Republic of Ireland, laying Queenstown. So it didn't sink in the middle of the Atlantic. It sank actually much closer to Newfoundland at that time. I think it was somewhere in the region of, well, it was less than 500 nautical miles, I know that much. But it was a lot closer to the final destination than the start point, so it wasn't in the middle. And it is known that the Titanic was going very fast. So was it a case that the men in the engine rooms were being put under pressure to go fast out of fear that they would run out of fuel? And then you would have a situation where the ship actually ran out of fuel and sank for that reason? Or was it a case, and this to me is quite disturbing, that they knew there was a fire and they were rushing to get to the nearest port, not even New York, possibly Halifax, in order to deal with the problem. Now, that to me, incidentally, that's my own speculation about Halifax. I can imagine that situation. That to me is even more sinister than the iceberg theory, because the idea of those men below decks being under that sort of pressure and being under pressure to hide the problem. Bear in mind, these were low level employees. They weren't on the board of White Star Line. And the shocking thing is, they were basically gambling with over 2,000 lives. Not the boilermen, but those at the top, which is a complete disgrace. By today's standards, that would be the worst sort of manslaughter. It's widely known the White Star Line basically got off the hook in 1912. Um, and I do think, looking at the information that is available, that Lord Mersey may have been compromised. I'm not going to outright say he was corrupt, but certainly it's suspicious that he just dismissed the fire theory outright. And apparently, during the inquiry, he interrupted people who were trying to give testimony to this effect, and he just wanted to focus on the iceberg factor. It's almost as if he was trying to protect White Star Line. So that to me is very interesting and unsettling. The idea that there was this fire building up, and what it actually done was weaken the steel components. In other words, the steel had been reduced in its tenacity fourfold. Well, it was four times less strong than it would have been. So when Thomas Andrews said, and it depicts this in the film versions, that bulkheads would need to go down and the Titanic could survive, I think it was on 5 out of 6 bulkheads, but not less than five. The problem was this fire in engine room 6, I believe it was, which by the way corresponds exactly where that mark in the photographs was, actually weakened the steel. Now that is shocking. I'm actually going to go closer to this poster. Yeah, you can't really make it absolutely dark. Basically, the idea that there was a fire on the Titanic for up to 3 weeks to me is completely shocking. I mean, imagine this by today's standards. Imagine if there was a luxury liner, one of those Caribbean liners, and there was a fire and it was allowed to sail. That would be, heads would roll. That would be massive. So this is truly shocking. Um, you know, I don't think it would be fair to say that White Star Line deliberately killed people like some sort of act of sabotage or anything like that. There's no evidence to point to that. But certainly, White Star Line would appear to be guilty of manslaughter of over 1,500 people. And this new theory, I think, carries quite a lot of weight. And of course, the iceberg factor. Survivors of the disaster did report seeing the iceberg, so I think that definitely played a part of it. But I think that was actually the secondary factor. So you can imagine the steel is already greatly weakened. Um, an iceberg is very powerful, especially given how old it would have been at that time. Um, so an iceberg can have the effect of steel. It can be that strong. So I've no doubt that the iceberg would have had the strength to cut open the ship a bit like sardines. But certainly the fact that steel was weakened made it easier for it to sink and for the iceberg to have that effect. And what is truly shocking is that people could have been saved. So White Star Line was prioritizing not being embarrassed over this huge gamble that, okay, we'll go across the Atlantic. And incidentally, only a small contingent of the original crew opted to stay on the ship, which was highly unusual. So whether they got cold feet and they just had a bad feeling about it, I don't know. But that is certainly intriguing. Anyway, I'll put a link to this documentary and let me know your thoughts. Um, I think the Titanic's always going to hold fascination because it is what it is. It wasn't any ship. It was a ship carrying millionaires. It was the ship of dreams. It was a ship that has spawned 1,000 books and dozens of films. I think it's always going to be fascinating to people, and I'm always interested in it. But this new theory, I think, definitely carries weight. What's interesting is each new film version has to kind of update the theory. So, for example, the 1958 Night to Remember, at that time the ship hadn't been rediscovered, so in the film it's depicted as sinking in one piece. Of course, they didn't know at that point that it had broken in two. The 1997 version, of course, by that point the ship had been rediscovered. Cameron depicts it as breaking in two, although he depicts it as breaking in two above the water level, whereas it likely happened below the water level. Um, Now, I think if there was another film made about the Titanic, and I'm not suggesting there will be anytime soon, but if there is, I wouldn't be surprised if they take the fire issue on board and really play on that factor. So let me know your thoughts. Do you have any theories? Incidentally, there's many other theories going around. One is that there is an Egyptian mummy on board, and the ship was cursed. Another is the Hope Diamond was on board. To be honest, these sort of conspiracy theories can be fascinating to look into, but I think the fire theory is more down to earth and yet also more intriguing. Um, it's more intriguing insofar as it's believable but also shocking. So let me know your thoughts. And I'll put a link to the documentary just in the information box below. Thanks for watching.